countries around the world. And our students have really used the classes in some amazing ways. Radio broadcasts, quilts. They've done an amazing variety of things as a result of the courses that they've taken from us. We now, of course, started these web talks in 2015. This is our 6th year with the web talks, and we are now pursuing the possibility of accreditation so that we can create a certificate program and people can get our courses, take them for credit. And we're also looking at establishing some partnerships with schools. So if you know anything about universities around you that might be interested in having courses on the Baha'i Faith available to their students, please contact us. We'll be very happy to follow up. We have, I should mention quickly, several courses coming up. Education, course on Baha'i education starts on Thursday. Bringing consultation to the workplace, science and religion, and the Baha'i Faith, both are in August, as is a course on spiritual motherhood on the 30th of August. And we have coming up on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Sundays of August. You can find more information by going to WellMedInstitute.org, of course. Today, of course, we will be hearing from Hussein Ahdieh, who seems to like red since he's got red in his picture, as well as the shirt he's wearing today. He was born and raised in Nariz in Iran, 6th generation Baha'i. His ancestors were amongst the first in Nariz to accept the Bab, and then later on, of course, became Baha'is. He came to the United States at age 19, which was not during the Babi period, as he will assure you. He completed a master's degree in European intellectual history, a doctorate in education from the University of Massachusetts, and has either written or contributed to 6 books so far. So, Dr. Ahdieh, we are delighted to have you here today. I will stop sharing my screen so that we have bigger pictures of ourselves here. And, whoops, sorry about that. I'm having a problem with my screen. And thank you so much for joining us. We're delighted to have you today. And to talk about Vahíd, perhaps one place to start would be if you could tell us a little bit about who he was and where he was from and what that place was like at the time. Can you start that way?
Sure. Thank you again for inviting me, Robert. I've been following Wilman Institute for the last 15, 20 years and its development, and it's amazing. I'm sure this is the seed for the future universities that Baha'is are going to establish all over. Vahíd was a very unique individual. Actually, it's interesting. Vahíd means peerless or unique. That's I say unique individual. He was born into a very distinguished religious family. Originally, the family came from Darab. That's why he's known as Sayyid Yahya Darabi, which is a town not far from Shiraz and not far from Nariz. His father, Sayyid Ja'far Kashfi, was a great figure in Persia at the time, and he gained a great deal of reputation because he wrote some essays and he issued some fatwa defending Qajar dynasty. Muhammad Shah and others, they were all part of this Qajar dynasty, but they originally came from Afghanistan. And the Persians were not quite willing to accept them as the ruler of the country. And it was Vahíd's father, Sayyid Ja'far, who wrote those commentary and those essays to defend them, and that made him very popular in the court of the Shah. And therefore, his son, Vahíd Yahya, became also very popular in the court of Muhammad Shah. Interesting about Vahíd's father was that he had many wives, and he kept them in different cities. And that was the safest way, I guess. He had the wife in Tehran, he had the wife in Isfahan, he had the wife in Burujer, he had the wife in Darab, he had the wife, I think, 6, 7 different places. And so later on, when I was following the story of Vahíd, I realized this man was constantly on the road traveling, And I was wondering, where does he stay when he travels so much? I found out actually he often has a brother or sister in one of these towns that he can stay with. And so that was, and all of them actually were leaders of their community. Vahid was very trusted by the Muhammad Shah, the king of Persia. And when the word came that there is young Sayyid in Shiraz is making claim to be a Qa'im, or the promised one, Muhammad Shah himself was a Sufi and interested in religious subject. So he wanted someone to go to Shiraz and find out more about what is this young Sayyid is all about. So through his trusted master of ceremony, somebody by name Mirza al-Fali, he contacted Vahid and he asked him to go to Shiraz and do the investigation for him. He gave him large amount of money, he gave him a horse, he gave him a sword, and the purpose of the sword was that if he found the Sayyid to be infidel and not truthful one, he has the right and permission to cut his head. And Vahid was carrying that sword with him throughout the time.
Was Vahid coming from Tehran?
Vahid originally came from, he came from a city of Yazd. He was born in the city of Yazd. His family came all from Darab. That's why his ancestor came from Darab.
No, but what I'm saying is when he went to see the Bab in Shiraz, was he coming from Darab or was he coming from Tehran?
He was coming from Tehran. He was coming from Tehran. And when he received the gift and the horse and the sword, actually, he traveled to Yazd. Which, in Yazd, he had a wife and 4 children, 4 sons, actually. And the first day that he arrived in Yazd, he climbed on the pulpit of the main mosque in the city of Yazd. And he told them that he's here, he's in his way to perform a major mission for the king of Persia, Muhammad Shah. And there were 2,000 people attending the gathering. And he said, when I met this Sayyid in Shiraz, if I find him to be a truthful one, I would let the king know. And if I find him not to be one, I would cut his head on the spot. It seems Vahid, with all his knowledge, with all his religious background, he was a kind of a tough character too, because throughout his life, I see number of occasions that he showed that he was a fighter, not just an intellectual writer or religious mullah. From Yazd, of course, he proceeded toward Shiraz. And in Shiraz, he had the 2 friends who they knew from the city of Mashhad, a fellow named Azim, that his name has been mentioned often in non-Berekar, because Azim, unfortunately, later on was responsible to organize the attempted assassination of Nasruddin Shah. And that was so unfortunate. But at that point, he was just staying in Shiraz and he was helping people to meet with Bab. Vahid stayed in the house of the governor because he was so prominent and he was the messenger from the Shah. Hussein Khan was his name. He was a terrible governor. He was a definite enemy of Bab. So secretly, he had to make the arrangement to meet with Bab. Bab was not allowed to have any visitor or to meet with anybody. So they had this interesting arrangement that the people would go to the house of his uncle, which was not far from his house. And there was some kind of an underground or doors connected between the house of Bab and the house of his uncle, the oldest one. And then Bab would appear. All together, and these are because of the station of the Vahid and because he was so known, we have same historical fact being testified and written by most historians, Baha'i and non-Baha'is. The Kawakab al-Duriyeh, Nasikh al-Tawarikh, Zuhur al-Haq, Mazandarani, Nabil, and many others. They all testify, and more or less they have shared the same stories of what happened in that occasion between Bab and Vahid. Altogether, they had 3 gatherings between Bob and Vahíd. The first meeting, of course, Vahíd came, and he felt some degree of superiority because, according to Abdul Baha, he knew 30,000 hadiths or tradition of Islam by heart. Mm-hmm. He has memorized Quran. He was son of one of the greatest mullahs of Iran. So he did not quite show that much respect and attention, and he was chastised actually by Azim later for not doing so. And he said, one day later on, you may regret this if you don't behave yourself. He had a series of complicated questions. He wanted to test Bob to see how much he knows. And he realized that, my goodness, Bob is answering all his questions with a very short answer and very much to his liking. After a couple of hours, he left, and he promised to come back. The second meeting, he was prepared this time, and he had a whole bunch of questions in his mind to ask Bob. But as soon as he entered and he sat down for the meeting, he forgot all the questions that he had prepared. And to his amazement, Bob began to answer those questions without even him asking those questions. And that shocked him a little more. This introduced some humility and some a little bit of more refined treatment of the Bob at that point. So again, he left in a hurry because he began to realize something is happening to him that he didn't like, in his mind and heart. The final session that did the job was when he told himself, I'm going to ask Bob to write a commentary for me on the shortest surah of Quran, which is Surah Abundance or Surah of Kosar, which is only 3 verses. And I'm going to ask him to see what he say about that. Again, he came to the meeting. He sat down, and poor guy, he forgot the question again. He didn't know what he was going to do. So Bob said, would you like us to write a commentary for you on Surah of Kosar, or Surah Abundance? So he agreed. Bob asked from his servant Mubarak and his uncle to bring paper and pen. And within a short, maybe from afternoon until the sunset, he wrote about 250 pages or 2,000 verses explaining what is this Surah Kosar or Surah Kosar is all about. That definitely shocked Vahíd, that how this man with such a speed and with such a melodious voice is chanting and is writing. And some historian, they may be exaggerating, he said while Bob was doing his writing and talking, Vahíd was in ecstasy, and he started to dance while he was listening. Some other historians say that 3 times he fainted, and they have to throw some rose water on his face to revive him so he could continue. It was, I'm sure, the most worthy and unusual gathering of 2 men. Yeah. And the fireside that took place, elevated conversation between these 2 great figures. When he finished the commentary, Bob turned to his uncle. He said, our friend Yahya is going to be our guest for the next few days, because he asked him to stay in the house and complete the writing of the commentary of Surah of Kosar. It took him 3 days to cross-check all the information, to tell where the other information has come from. And then at the end of 3rd days, he went back to house of Hussein Khan, the governor, and he wrote a letter to Muhammad Shah, the king, and the Mirza Aghasi, the prime minister, and informed them that Bob is the righteous one, and he has become a Babi.
Is the Surah of Kosar commentary still in existence? Do we know?
It exists, and I'm glad you asked that, because recently I read a wonderful article by Stephen London that they go over this whole Kosar's Surah Kosar, and I do recommend that people to read that. is a well-known. Yes, it is available. Yes.
So that's how he became a Babi.
Yes.
Where did he go then?
Oh,
Where did Vahid go?
It's amazing. I always thought Martyrdom was a war traveler. But when I did some research on the life of Vahid, I discovered this man at that time, middle of 19th century, he was constantly on the road. And he would go from place to place, try to teach the faith of Bab and trying to bring about as many converts as possible. From there, Bab instructed him to go to Bruges, where his father was living at the time, and tell his father about the newfound religion that he has accepted. Vahid's father had met Bab in the earlier days when Bab and Qudus, they were in Mecca. They went for pilgrim, as you know. And in that occasion, Bab told Sayyid Ja'far about his cause and his belief, but he didn't pay much attention. Even this time, he told his son Vahid that I'm too old probably to change things, and you can have your faith, and I don't bother you, and you leave me alone. So the father never accepted, but he never opposed the faith either. And then from there, it started from 1846, when he became a Babi, until 1850, when he gave his life. For these 4 years, he was constantly on the road. He spent many days with Baha'u'llah in Tehran. I think some of us may remember the occasion that he was in Tehran. Abdul Baha recalled this story, and he was sitting on the lap of Tahirih, and Tahirih was sitting behind the curtain, and Vahid was present among the people, and Vahid began to recite some interesting point about the tradition of Islam and new faith, and Tahirih, in her own way, called on him, and he said, "Oh, Vahid, it's time for talk is over. Now go and do some good deed and hit the road and do some teaching." Can you imagine this woman tell Vahid to do something like this? Poor guy.
From behind a curtain, no less.
Yeah, that's right. It did listen to her.
Abdul Baha on her knee on the other side of the curtain. That's very interesting.
Of course, that was a quite interesting arrangement. And then at this time, I hope you realize that Tahirih was rescued by Baha'u'llah because she was in prison as being accused of killing her uncle. And Janab Baha, which later we know him as Baha'u'llah, had made arrangement to bring her to Tehran. And she was living in the house of Baha'u'llah. In that occasion, Vahid was there too. Actually, Vahid met number of Babis in Qazvin. He visited Qazvin 5 times, according to my research. Qazvin was one of the largest Babi community in Iran at the time. I think there were a few big communities. One was Qazvin, one was Nevis, one was Yazd, probably somewhere in Tehran, that they had more than maybe 1,000 or 2,000 Babis. And so it was worthwhile for keep coming back and visiting Baha'is. There was an interesting man living in Qazvin by the name Hadi Farhadi, who knew that but he wanted to have established actually a sword factory. So he were making hundreds of these sharp, good-looking, fine-looking swords. So the Babis, when the instruction came from promised one from Imam Zaman, from Qa'im to wage a jihad, they have all the sword they needed. And they said in some occasion, Vahid would go and check these swords, and in one occasion, cut a couple of trees with that. He was very happy with the kind of sword they were making.
He knew a good sword after all.
He knew a good sword. I'm telling you, he loved swords somehow. That's why he lost his head eventually. Oh, and at this time, Bob was in Maku as a prisoner, and Vahid on foot walks all the way from Tehran to Maku in the cold winter. I think it was probably somewhere 1847, 48, to meet Bob in the prison and spend some time with him. Another occasion, they say that he was told that a Babi by the name Sayyah has just returned from Baku, visiting Bab, and he was so anxious to meet this man. So when he walks in, he found Sayyah barefoot, dirty, unshaven. You know, he was really not quite together. But they said Vahíd went on his knees and began to kiss the foot of this man because he has walked to the land of his loved one, and he kissed his eyes because his eyes has witnessed the face of the Bab. At this time also, he wanted to join Mullah Hussein and Quddus in Tabarsi, because that's where the action was at that time. But Baha'u'llah discouraged him and told him all the roads are closed and it's impossible to reach Tabarsi. So that's why how he spent these 3-4 years of his life. I can keep talking about places he went and things he did there, which is quite interesting.
So then he gets back down to Neriz, presumably pretty soon after all this, because the Neriz upheaval starts in
1850.
1850. Okay, so it's still a little ways away.
Yeah, 4 years later. I just want to mention something here, maybe I brag a little bit, that the source of my information, mostly about Neriz, has come from a diary of a man by the name Shafi, which is, if you don't mind, I'll tell you a little bit about him.
Please.
He is my great-grandfather. That's why I brag about him. At the time that Vahíd came to Neriz, he was only 9 years old. He and his father, Mullah Naqi, and his grandfather, Abdul Hussein, who was an older man, 84 years old, and hundreds of other people, they walked miles and miles outside the city to welcome Vahíd to Neriz. Now, Shafi was 9 years old. He witnessed arrival of the Vahíd, which I'm going to describe a little bit later. He witnessed the battle of Khajeh fortress that took place. He witnessed the second upheaval of Neriz in 1853. And later on, he went to visit Baha'u'llah. At that point, Baha'u'llah has not declared his mission yet. Somehow Baha'u'llah asked him, do you recall what happened when Vahíd came to Neriz? This is my way of thinking. I'm sure he said yes. So Baha'u'llah encouraged him to write his diary. And he did. We know he did because the good portion of Dawnbreaker, Nabil narrative, is really a copy of this man's diary. And Nabil himself said so. That on some page, I don't remember the page number, that if you want more information about what took place in Neriz, please go to Shafi's diary. This diary disappeared. Nobody knew where it is for the last 150 years. Member of the family, scholars, all kind of researchers, they wanted to get hold of this diary. And by coincidence, I was in Chicago attending a Persian conference.
Right.
And they sometimes these conferences, they drag and they become boring. And I don't have that much patience. So I left the session. I decided to go to the English session. They are more down to earth and they get to the point right away. I walked in the hallway and on the screen, I saw it said translation of the diary of Mullah Muhammad Shafi Nerizi. If you only knew what a shock I got when I saw that. Oh my God. So I got hold of the original. It was through the Ahang Rabbani, Source of Justice, and Afnan family, and all that I got hold of that manuscript in the original language. And I used that to write our book with Hilary Chapman called Awakening, which is really a story of Vahíd and Neriz and all that. And I really, if somebody is interested in the Babi period and they want to know more about Neriz, that's where to go. And the reason I'm saying this, because I think Neriz incident and upheavals was the most significant event during Babi's period. Of course, Mullah Hussein and Quddus and Tahirih and all, they were wonderful. But the magnitude of what took place in that town. Thousands of people gave their life. And we have their name, we have their stories, and we know what exactly took place. And that's a long one. So Vahíd came to Neres. Shall I continue?
Yeah, please do. Yeah, what year did he arrive in Neres?
1850.
In 1850. Okay.
It was June of 1850. He arrived in Neres. It was in the morning time. He went to the main mosque of the town, which is called Masjid Jum'eh. It's a very interesting. Later on, I'm going to show you a picture of that mosque. It used to be 1,000 years ago. It used to be a Zoroastrian temple, and it was converted to a mosque. And then it's a very unique structure, because I remember sometimes these European, good-looking, blue eyes, blonde people walk in the street of Neres, and I see them. They all go to this mosque and take some picture. There's something about the way they build a dome which surprised everybody, how they did this more than 1,000 years ago. So that's a story. Vahíd goes to the mosque. Thousands of people of Neres, they were waiting for him in the mosque and surrounding area. Another fact that we all should be aware, in Islam, there are two groups of people. You're either a learned one, you're a mujtahid, or you are a muqallid, you're a follower. So one reason that all these people became Babi, not necessarily because they investigate the truth for themselves, because one of the religious leaders, like my great ancestor Mullah Abdul Hussein, or a few others, Sayyid Ja'far, because they became Babi and because they trusted them, they all became Babi.
Right.
So on that occasion, there were thousands of people in the mosque, and there were hundreds of them outside the mosque. And somebody told me a story. The way what happened was Vahíd was on top of the pulpit giving his lecture, and then some people would hear him within some distance, and the person would repeat what Vahíd said. He quoted this page of Quran, and then the third person relay system. So this way they could all hear what Vahíd said. It's a very interesting arrangement that they had those days, how to do it with no mic system and no Zoom and all that. And he warned them. He said, this is a new faith, and OM has come. I invite you to join the faith, but I want to let you know that this could be the end of you, because the governor and majority of people in town are going to be after you. You lose your wife, you lose your life, you lose your property, you lose your home. And they all said they're all willing to do so. And they insisted that he should stay. Oh, by the way, Vahíd had a wife also in Neres. That helps. That's why he came. I think his name was Sohra Khanum. And he had a daughter by the name Tuba, which I'm going to talk about her later. Governor of Neres, a terrible man named Zain al-Abidin, who has become governor by killing his own older brother, who was entitled to become a governor. He put the children of his brother in a confined area, hoping they died. And they didn't die because a gardener provided them food and water and supplies. And then governor collected over 1,000 people and surround the downtown of Neres and send a warning to Vahíd: you either leave or prepare yourself to die. That's the battle that started in Neres.
Was it a particular area of Neres where the Babis were located? Was it like a quarter of the city, or were they scattered all over the city?
That's very interesting. Actually, I have another picture to show later. Some wonderful friend of mine has, with my explanation, has done a beautiful sketch and drawing of the city that shows exactly where was the area that all the Babis used to live, where was the area that governor and his supporter lived, and where was the fort that Vahíd resided.
The old fort that they had to repair.
Yeah, this is the fort. Now, the story of fort is interesting. This fort's been around for a long time. And then when Vahíd realized that the governor is up to no good, and is going to attack them. Oh, by the way, what happened? As soon as the governor and his man came back to Neris, they start to shoot the poor people from downtown Neris from their homes. And my great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, Abdul Hussein, was on the roof of his house. He was shot on the right leg, and this is all in Dawnbreaker. And Vahíd sent him a condolence letter and called him the first martyr of Neris, even though he didn't die, but he did shed his blood in that occasion. So Vahíd realized that he has to protect himself and his follower. So he sent 20 of his men to go and repair the old fort as much as they could and be ready. And in later occasion, he and other 70 of his followers, they went and they start to defend themselves in the fort of Khaja. This whole thing happened in 1850. There's a detailed explanation of what happened in the fort. A small group of Babis who were dedicated, they were committed, they were able to withstand the attack of thousands of enemy. Support came from Shiraz. The governor sent all kinds of troops and cannons and rifles and all that. At some point, the historian believed that there were 5,000 of the troops and others surrounding this fort, and there were maybe a few hundreds of the Babis inside. And then what happened? They have to betray him on that occasion.
Yeah, do you have any sense of, for example, how big the fort was? I mean, Sheikh Tabarsi, for example, was not very large. The shrine itself was, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 feet, 50 feet square, and then it had a garden around it that was walled in. But how big was this fort? Do we know?
Quite a big fort. Actually, I play in that area a lot because it was my hometown as a young boy and later on as a teenager, and I have lots of memories of that fort because it's amazing that for the Babis and for the Baha'is later, the memory of those days have been repeated again, generation after generation. So I was told all these stories as a kid. Mm-hmm. So when I go and play around the fort, I could really feel the Vahids on the horse, or I could see the Babis screaming Allahu Akbar and attack. And in some occasion, I was so enchanted with all this daydreaming that I could swear I saw a bunch of angels, they were dancing. I'm sure it was my imagination. There's not nothing else. But this shows, the influence and the effect of what can happen to your mind when you're
Not all the Babis then went into the fort. Many of them stayed in the city. Were they attacked there in the city as well?
No, what happened actually is, especially here, I'm glad to mention this, the role of the woman of Neris. Of course, the Nerisi woman could not join the battle, but their role was every time that there was a battle, they would all go on the rooftop of their homes and they start to, I wish I could imitate them, they would make a funny noise with their mouth. Oh,
ululation.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Ululation, yeah.
Very loudly and clapping and screaming and encouraging their men's folks to keep fighting, to keep defending the cause, to keep supporting Vahíd and all that. This was the main role. And of course, there were many Babis who did not go to fort, but it seems that when the battle started between the Vahíd's followers and the fort others, they would join in. Because I tell you, in one occasion, Dawnbreaker said that Vahíd instructed a man by the name Reza to take 14 people and at the middle of night to attack the camp of enemy. And they did that 7 and 7. They attacked from both sides. And there was a 90-year-old man among them. And some of them were even younger than 15. But then the battle lasted all night and they scattered the forces of enemy. But then at the end, it said 60 Babis gave their life. No, if he sent only 14 Babis out, hard to believe that 60 of them could die. This, I believe that many of them came from the town for the support. And then in that particular battle, it really, the governor realized that this cannot continue. And he himself almost got killed, but he escaped. And then he came up with the new ideas that we can talk.
How long did the siege of the fort last?
Almost 2 months.
2 months.
Yeah, and it's amazing that between Fort Khaja, between Tabarsi, and what happened between Hujjat in Zanjan. These are the three main events.
Right.
According to Shoghi Effendi, the Neri's incident, the first and second later, was the most horrific incident of the three. The way what they did during the war and what they did after with the prisoner, after second upheaval of Neri's, they killed at least 1,000 Babis. And they took 700 prisoners, women and children, that they dragged them all the way from Neri's to Shiraz and all that. Oh, I'd like to also mention that old man that was shot in the right leg, Abdul Hussein, a grandfather of Shafi. He lost 5 of his sons. He lost 3 of his brothers. But he was alive and was captured as a prisoner. They brought him to Shiraz, and he appeared in front of the governor. The governor talked to him, and he said, I can understand some of these average folks. They got fooled, and they got excited, and they followed this young Sayyid. But you're a learned man, you're an old man. What happened to you? And he said that, don't you realize that the day of reckoning is here? Imam Zaman, the Qa'im has appeared. The old days are over, and this and that. The governor got so upset that he told his attendants to fill up his mouth with the dirt and dust and all that. This old man was going to carry him as a prisoner to Tehran, along with the head of what they do is animals. They cut the head of the poor Babis, and they stuffed them with the haze, the skin and all that. They put on a spear, and they were carrying them from town to town. So they were going to carry all these heads all the way to Tehran. But then the Shah and the court realized this is such a terrible scene, and it's beginning to remind people what happened to Imam Hussein in Karbala. A similar thing they did. So they decided to stop this procession. So instruction came to bury the head. Just before that, this old man, Abdul Hussein, could not walk anymore. So they killed him. They also stuffed his head, and they were carrying them. And where they bury his body, this is some personal story. His body is buried in a very small town called Sa'adatabad, which is not far from Abadeh. Oh, I'm mentioning so many names.
Way down there?
You been there?
Abadeh is down close to Iraq, isn't it?
No, Abadeh is between Shiraz and Isfahan.
Oh, okay.
It's a big town, actually. But
I'm thinking of Abadan. I'm thinking of different.
Abadan, yeah.
Yeah,
Abadan, that's a different town.
Yeah.
So what happens is that there's a small little village close to Abadeh called Sa'adatabad. Now, my daughter, Linda, has married to a fellow by name Gavin, that his mother is from that village. How can you imagine?
How interesting.
How interesting that the body of my great-grandfather is burying the town that this woman's son would marry my daughter. A small town.
We should probably talk a little bit about the martyrdom of Vahíd, since we're running close to the time when we want to show the pictures, I think.
Yes. I guess they realized that the governor and his attendants and other military officers realized that this cannot continue. They keep losing this large number of their soldiers, and sooner or later, lots of them would be deserting and leaving, because they had no really attachment to these battles. They were doing it for a small amount of money, and they could leave anytime they want. So they decided to do the same thing that was done in Tabarsi. Mm-hmm. They sign a holy book of Quran. They write a lengthy statement or letter to Vahíd, And they told him, oh, dear Vahid, we finally begin to realize that you may be right, but we'd like you to come and explain to us what you stand for, what is the principle that you believe in, who is this Bob and this. But this cannot be done if you keep killing each other. Why don't you come to our camp and sit down with us and have a nice conversation? Of course, it was a trick. And then Vahid knew it, and his follower knew it. And they were quite worried. But then Vahid told them that they have signed the Quran. They said that they want to listen what is cause of Bob is all about. And it is my responsibility to go and share with them. So he decided to leave the fort along with 5 of his followers, with a terrible man among those 5 by the name Hussein Ahdieh. He is in hell for sure. So they came and they went to the camp. Actually, they said the governor and his military man came, welcomed him. For 3 days, they were talking and they were listening to him and this and that. And even during the prayer, they would all stand behind him. But then little by little, Vahid realized that something is fishy, they're not quite together, and they're up to some no good. So he wanted to send a message to his follower to be careful of what the governor is up to. But then the follower were waiting for instruction. The governor convinced Vahid, said, please write to the believers to come out and we can continue our conversation and this and that. So they really convinced the poor Vahid to write that letter. But then at the same time, Vahid wrote another note to his follower and told him, ignore the first letter. I did it under duress, under pressure, and don't do it, just do a surprise attack and scatter them. But the man who was supposed to carry these messages, Hussein Ahdieh, went to the governor and showed both letters to the governor. And they destroyed the second letter. They brought the first one in. The followers were quite surprised why Vahid is asking him to do this. But of course, they listened to Vahid. They left the fort. Most of them were massacred. Now, what to do with Vahid was also interesting. The people who signed the Quran, they had a little bit of religious attachment. They said, we cannot kill him because we already signed Quran that we are not going to harm him. But then there were a few others in the audience, officers, said, we never signed anything, so we would do it. So on that occasion, when Vahid was on the 3rd or 4th day of his visit, they took his green turban from his head, they tied around his neck, they strangled him, they tied him to a horse, and then they carry his body throughout the town. And meanwhile, the people of town, the enemies, they were throwing a stone, a stick, and all at him. Eventually, they brought him to the front of the mosque in the bazaar section, and they cut his head. So that was the end of this amazing scholars who is known as the best-known follower of the Bab. There was a woman in Nevis by the name Bibi Khanum, was a wonderful non-Baha'i woman who later on collected the head, collected the body, and buried them in a place, a small shrine called Shrine of Sayyid. And that's where Vahid is now.
Huh, interesting. Should we show some of those pictures that you wanted to share?
I'd love to, yeah. I have some slides to show. My friend Tatiana is going to organize this.
Tatiana is always helpful.
It's always good to have an assistant. Yep. Tatiana is a wonderful Bulgarian Baha'i. She and her husband are the caretaker of New York Baha'i Center.
So we've got
my classes.
The Shafi's diary, huh? Yeah.
Okay, you stay there and move as I talk. Thanks. Okay, this is.
Let's go back.
Oh, there's the.
No, keep going back. Go to the beginning.
Sorry.
Okay, this is the Shafi's diary. I was told by the wonderful Baha'is review folks that should not be shared and be available necessarily to public at this point. But I just put the first page here to.
He writes nice, clear Persian, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Not hard to read, at least.
That's right. You can read Persian, good luck. Or if you can be nice and contact me, I can send you a copy. But I cannot put it on the website.
No.
This is a typical tablet that received by Shafi from Baha'u'llah. Or don't move here, stay here. This is the map of the city that I mentioned. Can I move? This is where the Muslim live, the bazaar section.
Uh-huh.
This is where the Babis used to live. Right here. This is where our house was. You see Ahdieh's house?
Uh-huh.
The Baha'i Center was right close to us. And if you go farther away, this is where Khaja Fort is, where the all the battles and all took place. This was all done by this wonderful American friend. This is the mosque I told you that when Vahíd came to Niris, went on the top of the pulpit and gave this. This is the pulpit.
The minbar, yeah.
Pulpit that he went there and proclaimed that the new manifestation has come. This is his house in Niris, a sketch of his house. It was for me, it was a mansion. Of course, it was not a mansion. It was not Louis XVI or Louis XIV Louvre or places like this. But in a small village, this was such a huge and beautiful house, and it still is there. This tree was planted by Vahíd right next to Khaja fortress, and it still is there, and is considered a holy tree. Lots of girls who are looking for husband, they go and pray there and put some notes in the tree, or man when they're looking for a wife. This is the picture of the Fort Khaja. Somebody took a big chance, a relative of mine. They went to Niris and took lots of pictures of the ruin of the Fort of Khaja. And I have shared with them with the house. So in the future, when they're going to rebuild it, they would have they know how it looks. I'd like to tell you another story. In 1924, there was a major flood in the city of Niris. Half the city was completely destroyed.
Wow.
And then Shoghi Effendi sent instruction to all the assemblies around the world to help the Niris Baha'i community to rebuild. It's amazing. My grandfather at that point was a treasurer or whatever assembly. And they said there was boxes and boxes of coin and money sitting in the basement of their home that has come from all over the world to rebuild the city. And when I was doing my research on Abdul Baha's book, I found out the New York Assembly has sent $500 toward this project. I was so happy to see something like this that I'm doing. New York Assembly has done this. What they did actually, you know that after the Vahíd was killed and the Babis were defeated, they destroyed the fort and they put on fire. So with that money that came from Baha'is around the world, they rebuilt the fort and they bought a whole bunch of it. And then, of course, it destroyed again after 1979 revolution.
Yeah.
But I'm sure we're going to build it again, like every other places that we have picture of.
Yeah, of course.
This is the famous tablet. I want you all get hold of it. It's called Tablet of Patient, or Loha Yu, that's been provisionally translated by Fanon Apazir and Dalton Garris. And this beautiful tablet was revealed by Baha'u'llah for a man by the name Haji Muhammad Taqi. Okay, move it slowly so they can read.
Interesting. Have there been upheavals since the first two, also in Niris, or I suppose of a smaller sort?
The one that we talk about, Robert, was the first upheaval in 1850.
Right.
The second one that I really know, sometime in future, if you have nobody else to make an offer, I'm willing to make an offer on the second upheaval of Niris, which is much more significant than the first one, and also not known to the Western Baha'is. and it's mostly based on Shafi's diary that has not been available to the Western Baha'is, and is not available in the translation Dawnbreaker. So that's really, and then the third upheaval was in 1909, when again, during Abdul Baha's time, there was another massacre of the Baha'is that took place. And his interesting part is that 1909 was also the year that the remains of the Bab was brought to Haifa for burial. And Abdul Baha revealed a wonderful tablet that and everything in this faith require sacrifice and blood. And it was the blood of, again, the Babis and Baha'is of Near East in 1909 that helped to establish the shrine of the Bab in Haifa. These are more picture of the
fort.
This is the room of the Vahid. What if I ever talk about second upheaval? This is what happened in the mountain area.
I think I've heard, or maybe I read your account of it or something, because people had to go up into the mountains, and they were.
Oh, they went to the mountain, and it's unbelievable. Okay, this we talk already. You can go first.
Right. Huh.
Oh, this is where the body is shrine of Sayyid, where Vahid is buried. And because it's a holy place for Muslim too for thousands of years, fortunately they have not destroyed it, so we still have that.
Sure.
Oh, this is very good. Stay here. This is the first Babi and Baha'i marriage that took place according to the laws of the Bab. The marriage of the Vahid's daughter, Tuba Khanum, who married this fellow Bene Muhammad. And this is the handwriting of Vahid. That he wrote their marriage certificate that said it has a two witness, and has a two witness. I have sent the copy of this to the house. I have it in the archive, and it's the witness signature is there, the writing is there, and it mentioned that it's all done according to the instruction and the ordinance that Bob has established for a marriage. And this, there's a beautiful tablet of visitation that was revealed by Baha'u'llah for Vahid. And we have a wonderful, if you go to neariz.org, and if you want to, you can listen to the chanting of this tablet by a wonderful Arabic-speaking woman, Sana Rohani. And it's the most magnificent tablet I have seen that revealed by Baha'u'llah as far as Vahid concerned. I'm getting too excited and I talk too fast.
This is that.
Yeah, let's see if I think we have some questions.
Okay.
So if you want to stop sharing your screen,
sure.
I'll see if I can pop up. Whoops, I lost them. See if I can pop up the questions here. And let's go up to the top of them. One person asked about the access to the commentary by the Bab, which we heard, the Surah of Kosar, and somebody even pasted some of the text here in the chats, in fact. The first two lines of it, I guess. One person asks whether you will share, where'd it go? Share your PowerPoint presentation. There's a person who's doing a Dawnbreakers class. She'd like to have the PowerPoint for that.
I do have a PowerPoint that I talk about Dawnbreaker. I could share it. I think it's in YouTube, so you can go there to Hussein YouTube's and listen to that. I'm wearing, I think, the same red shirt on that occasion too. Look for somebody in a red shirt.
So you're talking about, it's a Hussein Ahdieh?
Hussein Ahdieh's YouTube.
You can go to YouTube and type in Hussein Ahdieh.
And then you would come, I think it's a Dawnbreakers presentation. Yes, it's there.
Good.
And also neariz.org. There are presentations.
The best place to get really lots of information is to go to neariz.org. There's a geography, there is history, there are hundreds of pictures
and PowerPoints
and a whole bunch of PowerPoints on different aspects of Neariz upheaval. Because if you're interested on the second and third upheaval of Neariz, that's also the place to go and find out more about it.
Interesting. One person said it's unclear who Vahid's parents were in terms of their backgrounds. Were they from a merchant class, religious background? Why was he welcomed in royal circles? I think you answered the why he was welcomed in royal circles because of the fatwas. But
yeah, I think his family, and actually Ahang Rabbani has traced his family tree, and it goes all the way to which one of the imam, I don't know which imam, but he was part of the leading religious families of Iran. And as I mentioned, because of his father's writing defending Qajar dynasty, they were a very popular family. And Vahid, of course, was a genius in terms of he had this amazing encyclopedic mind that could recall things and could relate things. And he was so spontaneous in his presentation.
Interesting. I see someone has raised his hand, but rather than raising your hand, I suggest people put their comments either in the Q&A or in the chat, because it gets complicated trying to figure out what to do with people raising their hands. Daniel asks this. He says, the Dawnbreakers speak of the Shah sending Vahid to investigate the Bab's claim, and that he would accept whatever is the Vahid's verdict about the claims. Can you elaborate on what is known of the Shah's learning that Vahid embraced the cause of the Bab and the Shah's reaction to this?
Yeah, it was so unfortunate that the Shah himself, Muhammad Shah, even though he was a sort of a shallow character, but his prime minister, Mirza Aghasi, was quite an evil man. He was very insecure. And what he was afraid that if there is any meeting that take place between Muhammad Shah, the king, and the Bab, it would even jeopardize his position. So he most likely he did not fully share all the information that came from Vahid with the Shah, number one. Number two, even though the Shah has shown interest to visit him, to see Bab, and the arrangement was supposed to be made that after he leaves Shiraz and goes to Isfahan and all that, come to Tehran. But Aghasi see to it that instead of coming to Tehran at all, he would switch and go straight to Baku as a prisoner.
Right.
So Shah never, I think, get the full picture of what was the Bab's cause. But it's amazing that he did not oppose the faith that much either. It was during his son's or grandson, I don't know, Nasruddin Shah, that most of the damage was made to the faith.
Do we know whether Vahid made an attempt to go visit the Shah after having left Shiraz? If he had become a Babi, he didn't try to go back and give a report or anything?
There's no indication. The channel between the Vahid and the Shah was mostly through his follower named Lutf Ali, Mirza Lutf Ali Khan, who was the master of ceremony. And he became Babi because most likely because of Vahid's association. But I don't think so that any meeting took place between Vahid. One thing that is interesting, that one of the historians wrote that in a meeting between Vahid and Bab, they said that his legs was shivering and shaking, and he made a statement that I have met with the Shah of Iran on many occasions, and I have never felt any intimidation or any self-consciousness. But meeting this young Sayyid, I lost my tranquility.
Do we know that whether the Shah actually asked Vahid to go down to Shiraz, or was it by letter or by messenger?
I think it was mostly most likely was a message. Most likely was through this master of ceremony that he made, that Shah sent him instruction. I don't remember reading anywhere that actually a meeting took place between Shah and Vahid, and he received any instruction to go. And I guess those days there was the instruction mostly was verbal, and the king's wish was that he would go and do some investigation.
That might also explain why there wasn't an effort, why Vahid didn't make an effort to go back and brief the Shah, since he had actually met the Shah in the first place, too.
It could be.
Yeah.
Yes,
and you said that he went down to see the Bab in Shiraz in 1846. So we're already talking about almost 2 years after the Bab's declaration.
Yes. What happened in that 2 years, actually, if you again remember, this life of Bab was quite in turmoil. He went to Mecca, he came back, he was harassed by the governor. There was a number of attempts to kill him. And I also here, I want to mention that the city of Shiraz had the leading Imam Jum'eh of Shiraz, who saved the life of Bab in 2-3 different occasions. He was a friend of Bab's uncle. And every time that the governor wanted to issue a fatwa or get mullahs to kill him and all that, he would protect the Bab. So we are really grateful to what this man did in terms of the protection he provided to Bab.
Did the martyrdom of Vahíd occur before the martyrdom of the Bab or after?
It was 10 days.
After. Or
before. For 10 days before the martyrdom of the Bab, Vahíd was put to death. I think it was June 29, 1850. And I think Bab was killed 10 days later, July 9 or something.
Right. Yeah, because the Nehri's upheaval really ended at about the same time as the martyrdom of the Bab. That's what I remember.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
You know so much, Robert.
Well, I've read some of it too.
This is wonderful.
I haven't read your book, but I know some of this, yes.
Wonderful.
One person says, I believe Vahíd was asked to return, but he made excuses not to. But the person's name isn't here, so I don't know who made that.
I haven't come across that point. I don't know.
That's interesting, yeah. Let's see. And Bahia and Thomas say, hello, Baba Aziz.
Of course, they are my best moral supporter. They never miss any of my Zoom. It's amazing. They're always there.
That's good. Do we know what happened to Vahid's various wives and children?
Unfortunately, see what happened, the same thing that happened to Tahir's descendants, the same thing happened to Vahid's. The enmity and the hatred of the Babi faith and the Vahid was so strong that lots of their children and grandchildren, they wanted to keep a distance, mostly for their safety and all that. They did not have the dedication of Tahir, their grandmother, or Vahid, their grandfather. The only thing I came across in one of the books that his grandson became a wonderful Baha'i teacher. And there was a story about his services during Abdul Baha and Shogi Effendi. But I don't think that any of it. He had the 4 sons from his wife in Yazd, and he had the daughter, Tuba, from his wife in Nevis.
And he had 2 wives altogether? You said his father had a large number.
Oh, his father was a playboy. Yeah.
But he only had 2?
He had only 2. Yeah, he was a humble man.
Now, how, according to Islamic law, does someone manage to have 5 or 6 wives?
This is amazing.
Probably some of them.
I have one for last 50 years, and I don't know how these people would have.
I suppose some of it has to do with having concubines, which are, I think, slaves.
It's quite possible.
Yeah.
And some of it, actually, for example, I'll tell you, one of my ancestors, that's why I have so many cousins, others. Even though he was a Babi and Baha'i, but he had number of wives in different cities also. And he was a great calligrapher. So he had the wife in Nehriz, which I'm part of that. Then he had the wife in Isfahan. I have lots of relatives coming from Isfahan. He had the wife in Tehran, and had a whole bunch of relatives in Tehran. And I was told that he also had a wife in Yazd, but we don't have any trace of the family there. And the story they give is that there was no hotel to stay when you travel and things like this. So you have to stay in somebody's house. And in order to stay in somebody's house, if there is any girl in that household, you cannot be a stranger. The only way you become part of the family is marrying somebody.
Yeah.
So he would say, okay, I marry your daughter or I marry your sister. And it's not a bad deal, that you marry somebody, you stay there and you carry on with your life.
Yeah, a lot of these might have been temporary marriages. That's true. Because that's the other thing that you can do in Shiism. You can have a temporary marriage, and it's a contract for whatever period of time that you want. And the children are considered legitimate as well, as I understand, too.
And you also have to realize, Robert, that the break from the tradition of Islam or Christianity really happened during Shoghi Effendi's time. Baha'u'llah would go to mosque in Makkah, not Makkah, in Akka, and pray, or in Adarme, or Abu Baha, and others. Shafi, the man that I mentioned, his name was the custodian of that famous mosque that I talk about. Even though he was a leading Babi and Baha'i, but he also was the mullah of the mosque. And it's unbelievable. It was a good piece of real estate. The mosque had, like a Catholic church, they had lots of lands and water right and all that. So it was a very good position to have. And most likely every Friday, he would go and conduct a Friday prayer, and good Muslim would follow him. But when he leaves, he goes and have his, not assembly meeting, but he has his fireside with the Babis and Baha'is. So this was a common practice. And some of them probably could even have more than one wife for a while until that practice was stopped by Shoghi Effendi.
Until Abdul Baha
established that, yes.
Not to do it, yeah. That's very interesting. Well, one person said here that perhaps we should hear that Arabic chant, and that might be a nice way to close the program today, if we can do that.
We can do it, yeah. If my good assistant can arrange it, that would be wonderful.
Good. That would be great.
Last moment thing, but we'll try.
That would be nice. Yeah.
This is beautiful if you can do it.
Specifically in terms of Tuba, the daughter.
Yes.
Do we know what happened to her and her family?
Tuba, what happened is that either a few days before or maybe right after Vahíd was martyred. Yeah. Go ahead. We're going to pray it.
Yeah, but I have to share.
Yeah, you have to share a screen, I think, to do it. To get a good audio.
No, I have to share. Give me a second to share. Share screen.
از قلم حضرت بهاءالله به افتخار جناب وحید. والقائم على أمره والقاهر فوق خلقه أول موج على بحر رحمة ربك الرحمن عليك يا سر الفرقان ومستسر البيان أشهد أنك شربت رحيق الوحي من يد العناية والألطاف وفزت بلقاء من كان موعودا في الكتب والزبر والألواح أنت الذي أجبت إذ ارتفع النداء وأقبلت إذ ظهر الأفق الأعلى في يوم فيه أعرض من في ناسوت الإنشاء عن الله مولى الورى أنت الذي وجدت عرف النبأ الأعظم إذ فاح وقميص مالك القدم إذ تضوع أشهد أنك نصرت دين الله وأمره بقلمك ولسانك ويدك إلى أن فديت نفسك في سبيله وشربت كوثر الشهادة باسمه وحبه وأخذك سكر سلسبيل العرفان إلى أن ترقى بقوادم الإيقان في هواء لم يسمع فيه إلا هرير أرياح عناية ربك مالك الأديان. أنت الذي بمصيبتك ناحت الذرات وبكت عيون الممكنات. أشهد بك ظهرت كنوز الأرض ولآلئ البحر وبك تزين رأس العرفان بإكليل البيان. أنت الذي أخذت الرحيق المختوم أمام الوجود وشربت باسم ربك القيوم. البهاء المشرق من أفق الفضل والنور اللائح من سماء العدل عليه وعلى الذين جاهدوا معك وأقبلوا إلى من أقبلت إليه وأعرضوا عمن أعرضت عنه وقاموا على نصرة الأمر معك وفي ظلك وفازوا بلقائك وطافوا حولك. أسألك يا إلهي وإله الأسماء وفاطر السماء بلآلئ بحر توحيدك وأسرار كتابك وبزفرات المقربين وعبرات المخلصين في هجرك وبهذا القبر الشريف والمقام المنير بأن تغفر لي ولوالدي ولمن تقرب أو يتقرب إلى هذا الرمز الأطهر وزاره أو يزوره لوجهك يا مالك القدر. أي ربي أسألك به وبمن استشهد في سبيلك بأن تقضي لي حوائجي وحوائج خلقك الذين تمسكوا بعهدك وميثاقك وذاقوا حلاوة بيان. إنك أنت الآمر العليم الحكيم.
Beautiful. Several people have thanked us for that. We have another question that was asked. Do we know whether the graves of the persons killed in the first upheaval have been damaged or desecrated at all in the recent times as a result of the current regime?
Actually, it is right next to the fort. There is a I'm getting so pressed now. Right next to the fort, there's a well that they threw many of the dead bodies of the Babis that they were shot to death. They called it the Surah of Kosar, a hole of ants, or ants' hole.
Right.
But they were treating them like ants, and they were throwing there. They said there are 400 of them who were dumped in that well, and they were buried there. And then right next to it, with the money that I mentioned earlier that came from instruction of Shoghi Effendi, they bought a big, beautiful piece of land, and they built a Baha'i cemetery there. That many Baha'is were buried there from that time, 1920s, until recently. And that cemetery has been completely destroyed, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And this was and the fort itself partially been destroyed. But I'm 100% sure that all these things will be rebuilt, and we're going to overcome these difficulties also.
Of course, eventually. How old was Vahíd when he was martyred?
40 years old.
40.
Yes.
This was a religion of young people, wasn't it?
It seems that
he was an old man.
The others. I'm telling you, compared with I think it's Qudus and even Bob himself, he was an older man. There's something was happening in Persia at that time. It's really the appearance of a prophet does that.
Yeah.
Suddenly that influence people like Vahíd and Qudus and Allah Hussein. I'd like to also mention that one of the responsibility of Vahíd throughout the time that Bob was in prison of Mako and Chahrir was be a communicator between him and his family.
Interesting.
And take care of them as much as he could. Even though Qudus was a sort of playing a leadership role of the Babis for that period, but the Vahíd was what I also like to mention. I'm sure people like you are aware of this. At that time, there was not really that much communication between Bob and his follower.
Right.
So some of this leading figure, like Vahíd, like Qudus, like Tahir, like Hujjat, they would have some notion of what is Babi faith all about.
Right.
And I have a feeling they were inspired themselves to interpret those, to keep the follower informed, to explain to them what this new faith is all about. So that's how the thing. And of course, we all realize that it was those tablets of Baha'u'llah and tablets of Abdul Baha who maintained the sanity and maintained the cohesiveness of the Baha'i community throughout the years.
Absolutely kept everybody moving in the same direction. One person just asked if you could share the YouTube link regarding the Dawnbreakers. I'm not sure what that refers to.
I made a presentation in the Dawnbreaker session. I don't even remember what was the subject, but I'm not going to share it now.
Okay.
No, it's too long.
I don't want to. Just where's the link? So the person was asking for the link in the chat.
If they go to YouTube, actually in the YouTube, I have a whole bunch of other interesting material. There's one called "The Woman of Neriz." I see unfortunately, there aren't that much information available about the woman. So the little information that I could get among those women and the significant one, they put the nice YouTube piece out of it and try to explain the role and what they did in that period of time.
Sure. So if they killed 400 Babi men,
yes,
that was a significant sized community in Neriz. So presumably there were also 400 women plus all the children. So it was a good sized community.
I have a feeling that there were at least 3,000-4,000 Babis at the time, because they killed all these 400 in this incident. And according to Shoghi Effendi, after the second upheaval, they captured 700 women and children that they were carried them as a prisoner from the mountain to Shiraz and all that. So if there were 700 women and children, I'm sure there was a whole bunch of 600-700 men also, because they also mentioned there were 200-300 heads on the spear that they were carrying. So I would say that it was one of the largest Babi community in Iran at the time.
Right. That's amazing. Well, we had quite a few people thanking us for a marvelous presentation, and I think we've pretty much reached the end of the session today with the various questions. The Arabic chant of the Tablet of Visitation was a really nice way of wrapping this up as well. Thank you so much, Hussein. This was really fascinating and deeply interesting and rewarding presentation for us to hear, and we're very grateful. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today and remind everybody that our next web talk is the 16th of August, which is a Wilman Institute talk about its pedagogy and the results of the classes for the last few years. And then we have two presentations on the 23rd and the 30th of August, which will focus on racism and African-American issues. So thank you, everybody, again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.